All right.
you know,
All right.
a member of that trade association.
I started work at Spartan Mills in 1922, in October 1922, and I've been here ever since, you see, and I'm not thinking about quitting. So I've enjoyed it immensely and had lots of experiences. I attended the first meeting of the South Carolina Manufacturers Association in 1926 when it was formed. Tom Marchant of Greenville headed up the meeting, and there was a big group there. I suppose I was the youngest person there. And I felt very honored to be there with my father, and I saw Shep Nicholson, who turned out to be a very close friend of mine. He was later president of Monarch Mills. He was president of Union Buffalo Mills at the time. And so I've had friends with him, been friends for a long time. He died several years ago. I don't remember the year, but
Now, could you tell me how old you were when you first started working in the mills, and then?
I was 1922. I was 22 years old, and I was worked up to be an assistant to my father in buying. I was in charge of the outside, and I stayed. It was next door office to him, and so I had interesting experience with him, and he never talked about the past much, but my father ran Spartan Mills, and my uncle ran Packlet Mills, and then my other uncle, Ben Montgomery, ran Drayton Mills. And I used to meet with them at my grandmother's house every Sunday, and they'd talk about the mill business, which meant a lot to me. And Mr. Milligan, Roger's father, asked me to go over to Gaffney. He wanted to connect the two mills up over there that were separate. And it was a challenging opportunity for me, and I felt very honored that Mr. Milligan gave me the job to run the Gaffney Manufacturing Company. I was 29 years old, and I just was getting married. He told me a story about I was going to get married, and he told me a story about Mr. Fant, who had worked for him down at Union, and he wanted to build a dam, a power dam, and he wanted to get married and take his wife on a honeymoon. And he said, well, I need this dam. We need to make power. And tell your bride-to-be to delay just 3 months, and we'll give you an extra week vacation, but I need this dam. I need you to stay here. But he said no. He'd promised his wife to go to Europe, so we went to Europe and came back, and a short time later he lost his job. And he wanted me to go 3 days, you see, and so I took 3 days on my honeymoon. And I took of course he wanted me to really run that mill, and I knew that, and so I really enjoyed the confidence that he placed in me. And I moved over to Gaffney and lived there for 6 months. And after I got married and enjoyed it very much. I had one interesting experience. My wife made the cook made waffles, batter cakes. So they had that, that you make waffles out of. And that Sunday night, I remember my wife used some of that batter thought it was mayonnaise, I think, or something like that. I used that batter on.
Taking charge of a mill, right? I think, was it in 1929 at the height of the Depression? I mean, a lot of things coincided with
Yes,
the Depression,
yes.
and you had to take
And my
over the
father,
mill.
when he was killed in this automobile accident, this was about, a year before, I guess. I'd just been over at Gaffney a year when this happened, you see. My father was killed in an automobile accident. And so Mr. Milligan wanted me to stay at Gaffney, and I thought I wanted to stay here at Spartan Mills. Where my father, we had most of our investments, you see. And I talked to my uncles about it and talked to Mr. Milligan. And Mr. Milligan agreed for me to try to run both of them, you see, which I did do for some years. And that's when
the Depression, and you have to take over this mill. Maybe you could even say that here comes the Depression, and I have to take over Spartan Mills.
Yeah.
Could you say that, and then tell me what you were up against, it being the Depression, running the mill?
Well, I was up against the problem that we had too much production in the country, overproduction. And we had meetings, and we were asked to curtail. And I was operating 2 mills, Spartan Mills and Gaffney Manufacturing Company. And we were in the city limits, burdened with city taxes as well as county taxes. And Mr. Milligan, Roger's father, was a great believer in controlling production and not producing when you couldn't sell the goods at a profit. And we were always advocating curtailment. Well, with this extra burden of higher taxes being in the city, I felt that that was something that we could not compete unless we ran like other mills did. We were not running on 3 shifts. And so first thing, I had to convince Mr. Milligan, and I got Dr. Hamrick's help. And Mr. Milligan was like a father to me, but he was very much opposed to overproduction. But I finally convinced him that we had to operate on the same basis as our competition, or we wouldn't make money. And we had to modernize our mills. And we began putting in new equipment. And we spent a lot of money in 1929, bought new looms. We organized the Standard Loom plant here in Spartanburg. The Draper Corporation, one of their chief men came down here, and several of the mills put up money and built a loom plant here in Spartanburg. And we bought several looms from them. 300.
And how many people, how many mill owners were there that were operating these mills here?
Well, there were about 32 million spindles in the United States. And now they're only about 12 to 13 million, giving you an idea of how much the equipment has gone down. There's been lots of modernization. There's been more improvement and more technology advanced. And we didn't have computers then, and now lots of the machinery, we need more highly trained personnel. And we really got an industry that we're very proud of. But the production has gone up. We're running looms now, turning off 1,000 picks a minute, you see, and then 160 picks a minute.
And back in 1929, 1930?
Yes, 1930. The production was very low per person, you see. Now you can operate a mill with, well, it's been so much less employees required. You go in one of the mills in China today and you see hundreds of employees, whereas in this country you would operate with 10 employees over there that operate with 100. But they haven't got modern equipment, but they're going to have it. See, I've seen that.
With the National Recovery Act and the Textile Code, which is a big part of our story. Could you tell me about how you all, what you thought about Roosevelt and the New Deal from the Southern textile manufacturers' point of view?
Well, I tell you, uh, I've been very much interested in the tariffs. You see, the tariffs went in 1913, and I was told that that the tariffs from all the ports really what our government took in tariffs and can paid a good part of the government expense. We never had any problem with imports. I never worried about imports. We had a market here in this country, and I would go to IFCATA meetings. That's all over the world when we'd have these meetings. And I remember
1932, during the depth of the Depression, the election was going on. Were you supporting with Roosevelt, or did you support the?
What did you think about Roosevelt in 1932?
Well, I was not for him too much, you know. I thought he was a New Dealer. I don't recall much about that, but I remember lots of discussion. Just faintly remember that I thought that he was a great politician. Everybody loved him, but and he was good in the war period. I was all for the war period, but then he got sick. You understand? And but now I'm going.
But the whole thing about Mr. Montgomery about overproduction, and after Roosevelt got elected, Roosevelt tried to take some steps to help industry, the textile industry, control overproduction. And part of that was the textile code. Can you tell us a little bit about how the textile code came about?
Well, that's what I just don't know enough about, just to be frank with you. I do not know enough about it. I know this, that every year that I've been in the business under the code, the more goods have come in. You understand? Every year there's been an increase in imports, and I've tried to fight that every way I could. Of course, we're giving away the textile market. I've looked upon us as the best manufacturers. We're giving our people better values in this country, and I wanted to keep our employees. We've got 4 and 5 generation families here. I'm very proud of it. Our mills have been cleaned up, but I can tell you, I've had films made back 25 years ago, and to look at the textile mills today and what they were 25 years ago is very, very different. And we've got clean mills, air conditioned. We provide hospital and medical care for our employees, you know, in the stores, the finest stores, paying $4.50 an hour. We've got a wage here with the perks amounting to around $9.50. You understand? So we've been able to, we've sold our whole houses, the homes. I've seen what's taken place. We used to, we used it's Startex mills. Every house, we didn't have a house with a bathroom in it. We had to re-roof every house when we bought that mill out there. You understand? Yeah.
You're talking about when you created the textile villages?
That's correct. We bought the mill, and now we've sold every house we had to them employees, sold them at cheap prices, and they appreciated it. And it's hurt me terribly that we've had to cut off lots of people. We put in new machinery, lots of employees. We have to cut them off when they buy new machinery. Yes, the only reason you buy new machinery is to make better cloth and reduce the cost. So today we've got by far the most efficient textile industry, and our employees in the United States are producing much more cloth per employee per hour than anywhere else in the world.
It's interesting. It seems like that was happening back in 1950 1933 and 1934, after the NRA went into effect.
Yeah, well, I see what you want. See, it's hard to go back that far for me. You know, that's what you're talking about now. Is I know that I didn't worry about the competition until much later, starting, I could say the last 20, 25, 30 years, it's been very, very difficult because we've been giving away our market. I can understand it in case of a war. You see, with the war coming on, we'd want to trade to get airports and get friendships. But today, in the last 20 years, we shouldn't be doing that as much as we are doing.
But you talked, Mr. Montgomery, you talked about Garish Milliken
Yes.
supporting the curtailment of production, and then you argued at Gaffney that you needed to produce more.
Yes.
So that you could make your
That's correct.
pay your overhead. Is that right?
Yes, right.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about how that was? What how the mills were all trying to not produce too much during
That's
the
correct.
Depression.
They'd have meetings, and I remember Mr. Hamrick would tell me, Mr. Montgomery, said, as soon as I started in the mill business, I ran the mills full. But I found out we'd have meetings with the millmen. They'd all talk about curtailment, but they'd go back and then run all as fast as they could, each one of them. So there was not much cooperation between them, but they had print cloth groups, you know, trying to advocate curtailment. I know Mr. Milligan was a strong believer in trying to get people to work together and not producing, because always supply and demand. You know, when you produce too many goods, you have to sell at lower prices. And it was not any agreements, but we couldn't agree, but we would try to get mills just to say run 4 days a week or shut down a week a month or something of that kind. And we just, it never did work satisfactorily because you couldn't get sufficient number of people to agree to it. And then we had the laws about in the country, and you might be breaking the law if you had some agreement, you see. But anyway, that was never done. And all I know, what stands out in my mind is that it's this big increase in imports into this country, which I was trying to tell you. I don't understand why our government today, that needs money so bad, needs money.
Huh?
What is it?
I said you must have been anti-NAFTA 100%.
And
Yeah.
I believe in tariffs, you understand,
Uh-huh.
but I don't believe in, for instance, in some of these countries, in India, there's 150% tax, and they give it, in Pakistan, they give advantages to people.
Can you comment on the New Deal and the textile industry at the time?
I just don't recall.
Okay. Do you remember when the period?
I know that times were very hard. I know this, that I was president of the association in 1946 or 47, something. I think about that time.
Ms. Montgomery, you were talking about controlling production. One of the ways that was proposed to do that under the NRA was to institute the 40-hour week.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And did that help control
Yeah,
production?
that's
And how did you feel
when I
about
started
that
working in the
aspect?
mill, I remember we worked 55 hours a week, you see. I think it was 55 or 60 hours a week. And it went to 40. That's right. I remember that. But that's I wouldn't have thought of that if you hadn't mentioned it. But then the textile industry has been running around the clock, you understand. We run now all the time.
And at that time, they went from 55 hours a week to 40 hours a week, and they went up to a minimum wage, 30 cents
Yes,
an hour.
yeah. Yeah, when I started work here, it was 20 cents an hour. That's 20 cents an hour is what the common labor made. And now it's $4 and a quarter. Isn't that right? $4 and a quarter.
Minimum wage.
That's
okay.
right.
Do you, there was, at that same time that they put in, that they changed the hours and the wages and they made a minimum wage, they also instituted a law, Section 7A, which gave workers the right to unionize and organize with the protection of the government. That was in 1933. Do you remember that? When all the workers started to organize into unions, according to Section 7A of the government.
No, I guess I'm just too old to remember that. I'm sorry, that's where I don't remember.
Mr. Montgomery, they had a employees committee at Spartan Mills. Do you recall that there was a group of employees that were wanting higher wages?
Yes.
And
We had a strike here. That was it. We had a strike. Now, what do they call it? The strike? It started in North Carolina, and we had a parade that came to Spartanburg, and we were organized here at Spartanburg, and had a union at Spartan Mills. The Flying Squadron, they called it. I think that's correct, isn't it?
mm-hmm.
And I do remember that. And we had the union here, and I didn't think it was necessary, but that was just my thinking. But we had it, and we dealt with the union. We had contracts, but we had the golden rule idea ourselves and management. We didn't think it was necessary. We had to compete with other mills. We've always kept wages in line with other mills, and we've been among the first to increase wages, and among the last. There hasn't been any reduction in wages in many years, but we finally, everybody got out of the union here, but we had a union for many years, but in the last several years we haven't had one. I don't think we will have one again, just because I think we've built confidence in the company. We have an ESOP plan. All the employees are participating, and people, all we want is them to, we believe in the ESOP idea of them having part ownership, and our employees own 30% of this company. And we found it a very satisfactory arrangement, because we think we feel the employees are helping us so much and getting more efficiency. We find that it's amazing, and we have the Deming idea also, and about how employees, and I think if you interviewed some of our employees, I know I've got some old people that can remember better than I do, and maybe that they could remember some of the things that you would like to know, you see.
Do you remember when the Flying Squadron came into this area, they closed down a lot of mills, didn't they?
That's right. No doubt about it. And I look back on it, wondering what I might have done about it. I don't think there's anything I could do about it. They stopped at Gaffney Manufacturing Company. They had the same thing on the way down here. They came down from North Carolina, groups to organize, you see.
How did the Manufacturers Association here in South Carolina deal with this strike?
I think that the right to work law is the finest thing that's happened in South Carolina. It had a lot to do with the building of our state, and the textile industry has been the backbone. But we've here have been interested in diversifying industry, and I'm very happy that the Chamber of Commerce is promoting diversification, and we've tried to diversify our operation, going into finishing goods and not being absolutely dependent as a company on selling gray goods. So we've got finishing plants as well as gray good plants and yarn plants. So we a vertical unit now.
Whereas back in the 1930s, was there diversification or was it just?
We did. We're not diversified in anything. We had print cloth mills and yarn mills, you see. Today, we take it right through to try to sell a finished product. We sell, for instance, the medical, hospitals. We bought the.
But at the same time, a lot of the letters from workers here and from workers in other parts of the country were saying that they were having to do 10 too many looms or
That's
10
right.
too many frames.
Stretch out. That's right. They were accused of stretch out. No doubt about that. But we tried to work it on. We had time studies made on what a person could do, so much rest period. I remember distinctly we would have watches to watch people, and they didn't like that either. But we wanted people to have a certain amount of rest period, what was the proper thing to do, the right load. Because when you overwork somebody, like poor work, and you want to avoid poor work because first quality is what you have to have. And it's been a growing thing. Always you have to sell seconds at a great discount.
It seems like that was one of the big issues of that strike in 1934. Do you remember why they struck in 1934, the big general textile strike?
Yes, I remember just a little bit about it, you see. That was the big strike period. That's right. I don't think we had any more trouble than anybody else had in Spartan Mills with the union at that time, but I had to deal with them more. Those that didn't have a union were fortunate.
Did you ever call the governor? Was it Governor Burns at the time? Who was the governor of South Carolina? Did you ever call the governor during the strike or ask that he send National Guard troops?
I just have a haze to remember. I know that I got help here myself. We would always have the sheriffs. We had deputies here, and one man, Major Manning, I remember very well, would always come over, walk with me here, and they were afraid somebody was going to hit me or something, but they never did. I never did have any problem. But I was over here every morning during the strike. But Bernard Manning was a friend in the cotton business here. His brother was prominent. His father had been governor at one time, South Carolina. And this was Will Manning's, who works with us now, is his uncle, one of his uncles.
Major Manning, was he a major in the National Guard?
Bernard, yes, he was.
There were lots and your mill wasn't the only one that had people trying to organize a union. There were all over South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. They were trying to organize unions too. Do you recall how the textile industry might have decided as a group what to do?
Well, I knew some of the people here in the union. Pollard, I worked in the mill here for 6 months myself, and I knew some of the people well, you see, and some of them turned out to be some of our most loyal employees at a later time. But I always dealt with the union. We never did refuse to meet with the committee. We negotiated contracts with them. And so I felt that you could live with the union, and if you didn't do the job, you could fire anybody, you understand? But we always never wanted to fire anybody anyway. We always wanted to keep our people. We had a system of warning and trying. Our main trouble was always training supervisors and having them properly trained. Now we have harassment cases, and it's very difficult. We try to train people and we have regular courses. We provide scholarships.
It seems like you are, even though the workers have been given the right to organize, that Section 7A law, they were firing them, even before that strike. Does that ring? I mean, that was a big problem, whether, other mill owners should recognize that the workers were trying to organize under Roosevelt's laws, or not.
Well, I don't think there's any question but what the textile mills did not have the public relations departments, and they've done not as good a job as they should have done in selling the policies, you see, and catering. They've always held back from giving out publicity. You understand? I think the millmen have been poor communicators. Really, I certainly admit that. We try to I know I've always tried to meet with the press whenever they wanted to know about, but I guess we don't do as good a job as we should, but we do. We have a newspaper we put out every quarter. We've had for several years to furnish information about our company and about the people.
And back then in 1933 and 34, do you remember how the press or the media was dealing with this big general textile strike? Because it did get very violent here in South Carolina.
I don't remember enough about it.
Do you recall in Honeypath that there was the workers who were killed there? How did you feel when you heard about that?
Oh, I felt bad. When we bought Startex Mills, they'd had a strike there, and somebody had been killed out there the year before we bought the mill. So we were concerned about it, no doubt about it. But I've never had any really problems with it. I've never had anybody hurt here at Spartan Mills or any of the mills with which we're connected. And I've known that they have had it at other places, but I think very few. I found that today, our people, you can't tell them you go to the churches here, you just feel like we used to, people would be known as lint heads in the mills, Now we have, you think you were uptown, any one of the churches we've got here, you see. We used to have to go to the mountains, my grandfather, to get people to work in the mill, bring people down. We got people here that some of them would want to leave the mill to go down and see a train, you understand, come by, want to leave the machinery. Then they have to go down and see when it comes down through Spartanburg at the railroad station, you see. So it's been education, a great deal of education has been necessary. My grandfather tried to run a mill in Charleston with black people, and it was a complete failure. That's an interesting, that people in Charleston, they don't ever admit there was an old cigar plant down there, and my grandfather thought it would be a good idea to build a mill and to have only black people working in it. And it was a complete failure. And they moved the machinery out to Gainesville, Georgia, and built a mill down there. And I've talked to friends in Charleston, they don't even want to admit they had a textile mill down there, you see.
What was the policy of working with them? How did you use black employment back in the 1930s?
See, this was before my day, during my grandfather's lifetime, that he did this. When he was killed he died in 1902 or 3, something like that.
And when you were running the mill, did you have the black employees?
Yes, that came in during my administration. We didn't have any black people in the mill, you see. And then we began employment. They used to always sit in the back of streetcars, the black people did. But we have some supervisors now that are black and very good. But it's taken a long time. If you go back to your parents, grandparents, and see the dresses, you kind of feel, most generations look back, and you just can't realize. When I look at pictures of my grandmother, my father's mother, Well, I just think when my mother's mother used to have these black dresses, and I see whalebones, come out and stick down in them. But they're very different, you see, today, and how the generations change.
So what jobs did the white employees have, and what jobs did the black employees have in the 1930s?
What? Not that what?
The black workers, which jobs did you give them in or around the mill?
Well, I think that the people in the mill, it was through the churches and help with the churches and the schools. It's one a gradual that people bought the idea that people, all of us are human and want to be treated alike. That's a gradual. We never did have any problem here with it. You understand? No.
Mr. Montgomery, a lot of the mills, from people I've talked to at that time in the 30s, either had no black workers in them, or if they did have black workers, they were janitors. They were people who cleaned up
Yes,
the restrooms.
that's
et cetera.
what.
Is that how it was?
That's right. That's correct. It started off, and no question about it, clean sweepers and so forth. And then gradually, on the others, we had a real shortage of people too here during World War II. But this was many years later. But the way it started off was just like you say. We had started off as sweepers and the lowest paid jobs, and for truckers, and you understand, and in the opening room, and in the card room, and then you got in the spinners and weavers, and it just gradually worked in that way over a long period of time.
Did the white workers didn't want to work in the opening room or the picking room
That's
or
right.
trucking?
That's right. And that was more of a manual job, picking up cotton and and putting it in hoppers. And we had white people doing it, and they didn't like the job. They wanted to get out of that as soon as they could, so we would promote them out and start with black people there. And then we have, of course, the policy of most mills is oldest employees that are efficient get advances. And we had some black people that were good, and they gradually got better jobs.
One question I had about earlier with in the 1934 time, some people I've talked to have said that when the time came when they were voting on the union, that they recall that they went and taught into your office and talked to you, that you talked to workers individually in 1934. Do you remember that? What would you tell workers at that time?
Well, I always tried to take the position that they had a right to do anything they pleased, but they didn't have to join the union to get fair treatment at Spartan Mills. That we wanted to give them fair treatment, but you have to have supervision, and you have to have rules to abide by them. But I've had all sorts of stories told me at times where some supervisors were not properly trained, and they'd have complain about having the pipes too hot, not cut off, and little things that I think supervisors might pay more attention to. But and when those things come up, you always tried to do your best to explain to your supervisor anything you could do to get along with people. That was a very important thing in life.
Do you think that your colleagues, in the Textile Manufacturers Association were genuinely surprised that the workers tried to organize and unionize in such a massive way?
I don't exactly understand the question that you were asking me. I really don't. I feel that education has done so much for the people that why do you want to employ somebody and take advantage of them? Life is too short, and you want to be fair. You've got to live with yourself, and you want people to treat people like you want to be treated yourself. I don't know how to explain it any other way. Certainly, we don't ever want to employ somebody and work them too much. You understand? But you've got to have some outside advice as to what is too much. You've got to be efficient in your setup, and there's a lot of competition when there's overproduction. So
How did the textile industry get their views across to the Roosevelt administration about how they felt? How did you communicate with the Roosevelt administration?
Well, I'd always try to communicate through our association, ATMI, and that's the thing we've always had in our association, South Carolina Association, and we meet every year. We have an annual meeting, state association, as well as an annual meeting of the National Association.
You know, back then, I think it was W.D. Anderson and Donald Comer.
Yeah.
They were the two men that went to Washington and helped President Roosevelt put
That's
the
right.
textile code together.
That's correct. Donald Comer was a great leader in our industry. When I was president, I got Hugh Comer to make this speech for me at our association.
And you know, W.D. Anderson, when they were putting the textile code together, apparently W.D. Anderson said it's very important to have the North-South differential, that he wanted to maintain that the South got paid their workers $1 less than they did in the North.
That's Colonel W.D. Anderson of Bibb. Now, I don't remember that, but I know that I've always heard the story that he was responsible for the tire cord people getting to go into the manufacturing business, you see, down at in Georgia.
There was, all of that I've understood is that in 34, when that happened, when you had the strike then, you didn't recognize the union, but they had another strike in 36, and then you recognized the union in 1941. What changed your mind? Why didn't you recognize the union in 1934?
Well, I didn't recognize the union, I suppose, because they had a vote, had they? I don't, at the time that you asked me, when they had a vote, that they voted to put in the union here. I didn't want to recognize them until I knew that that's what I have a faint recollection, a very faint recollection of not wanting to have the union here. And certainly I wouldn't want to have the union come in here without me knowing that they represented the majority of our employees.
And I think that was a big question in 1934, whether these strikers,
Yeah.
the union people, were representing the majority of the
Yeah.
employees.
Well, I don't think anybody was anybody recognizing the union until they had a vote.
Well, you know what I think you can stop for a sec. The union was Carolina.
Yes, I remember when our strike was over, and there was a lot of feeling that it took some time to wear off between some of our employees who wanted to work. You know, when they came in back to work, a lot of people didn't. They didn't. They had different viewpoints.
Could you maybe you could repeat that again? After the general textile strike, what happened here in Spartanburg?
Well, when the people went back to work, there was friction between some of the employees because some of them were not in favor of the strike and some of them were. And we had an election. I remember I went to Washington and we didn't want to take back about 40 or 50 people. And I was told that I had to compromise on that. And we took back about 14 of the 40 people. It's a compromise, you understand? And but I haven't thought about this in years since, but when you shoot in the cover of birds, that's what this man was representing what's the name of the group in Washington was always taking the side of the National Labor Relations Board.
Textile
Yeah.
Labor Relations Board.
That you're bound to make some mistakes, and they be on the idea. Some of our supervisors made some mistakes, so we compromised and took back people, you understand, out of 40. And then taking those people back, we had some people in the middle. And that took some time for that to die down. But some of those people were very fun, turned out to be very fine, loyal supporters. We never heard anything about any friction with them at all, you understand? Whereas some few people continued in the union with it, and we didn't fire them. We took them back and worked with the union right along, you understand? But they didn't have many people in it, and they finally voted themselves out. I went out in the mill and talked to the employees. Bottom said certainly they could do what they pleased, but we didn't believe it was necessary to have a union. They have to, sometime they voted the union out here of their own.
Now, what happened to those employees that you didn't take back?
They got jobs elsewhere. I think some few probably came back later. I never have checked on that, to tell you the truth. But I know they must have gotten jobs.
You know, that happened. There were a lot of after the strike. There were a lot of mill owners who didn't want to take their employees back who had been out on strike.
Well, there was something they'd done during the strike, like threatening people, like some throwing rocks at the houses where some people were working. And we didn't think we should take some of those people back through acts of violence, you understand? But that's just, I just don't remember enough details. It's not that I'm trying to keep anything from you. I wish, that's what I'm worried about you. I'm really feeling today, I'm so interested in trying to get our industry represented properly. I'm trying to think, what is the best magazine, insurance company, somebody who wants to get a Pulitzer Prize and writing a story and giving facts about the textile industry. I'm very proud of it. And I think the government could collect money through the tariffs, as I tell you, back on the tariff situation. And I know that in 1913, so much money was being taken in by the government, you understand? And I believe that's a way that they could get money for our government expenses to reduce our national debt. And I think that's the most important thing really in life today, is to do something to decrease our national debt. Well, we always felt the National Labor Relations Board was somewhat prejudiced, you see. The textile industry might have been, a lot of it, he had a right to be prejudiced against the textile industry, because I think there's very little known about the textile industry. I found out when I was trying to we had a majority in Congress 2 times, you know, that voted in favor of doing something for the textile industry. And then it was vetoed by the president. You know that. And then we just dropped it. We didn't continue the fight. Of course, it went to the politicians. When you talk to a politician now, they ask you, well, Mr. Montgomery, the textile industry don't agree on anything. You've got as many people working one way as
I was going to ask you about the political support. At that time, that was Reagan who vetoed those 2 bills, the 2 textile bills you're talking about. Back in the 1930s, did you have a lot of support from the South Carolina congressional delegation in Congress, were they on your side? Did you have the senators and congressmen, were they supportive of the industry or were they against you?
Supportive of industry, always. Always the textile and people in North and South Carolina, in Georgia, I think all of them were for supporting the textile industry. But we had a majority, but lots of the people thought that we were sweatshops, so to speak, you see. We didn't have people selling the idea enough. I don't think our congressman or the industry had done enough in the way of public relations or whatnot in selling our industry. And instead of fighting on after having a majority in Congress twice and losing by only 8 or 10 votes by the president's override, what we should have done is kept on the fight every year. But instead of doing that, we just backed off and listened to our politicians and saying, now is not the time. Now is not the time. You can't get anything through. And no president has come in willing to do something to give the textile industry. They talk about protection. I don't feel myself, for instance, we've been paid money from our government now to use cotton, you understand, on account of the fact that we can't buy cotton. And from Europe, we have to buy cotton in the United States.
That the textile industry felt handicapped by having to pay workers a minimum wage, and you know that.
No, I don't think we. I think we want to raise the standard of living in this country, and I have to agree that I like to give foreign missions. I believe in foreign missions, but I'd rather give my money away and not have our government do it. You understand?
I do. The industry talked to each other and said, you don't want to take that mill worker anymore because he was active in the strike. How did that work? Did that happen?
I just tell you, I wish I could answer your questions. That's what I wish I could.
Okay.
And I just don't have the memory to do it, you see.
Mr. Montgomery, I guess he's asking is, were there blacklists? Were there lists of people who weren't to be hired? Were there people who were that were not to be hired because they had been involved in the unions?
You mean like blackballing people? No. Well, I have to admit that I've heard something about that, of course. You like to, when you employ somebody, you want to look them up, you understand? You want to know something about anybody you hire now. We paid much more attention to that than we ever did. You understand? And if we knew a person wanted to organize us, I certainly wouldn't be in favor of bringing him into our company. I knew that. Why bring him in? Why look for trouble? I'd want to know myself what it was that he was going to give him. You understand? I wouldn't want anybody coming in that I knew was a professional organizer, getting a job, coming into our company for the view of organizing our mills. Now, is that prejudice? Would you not want to employ some people who you feel wanted their jobs and looked upon you? It's when somebody comes in here and asks me for a job and tells me, Mr. Montgomery, I've been wanting to work for Spartan Mills. It makes me feel very happy about it. Certainly I want to, attitude is a lot in life. And you want to, everybody is biased somewhat. Everybody. And you like to have people to work with you.
I think at the time, back in '34, a lot of the people were surprised at this blackballing because they were under the impression that they would be able to go back and get their jobs because President Roosevelt had said that was what was going to happen. So that was I think that was, you know, I think that it was, the promise of the government versus, I guess, you know, the people who ran the mills and ran the villages and owned the homes, and I guess it was a decision, you know, who was gonna have more power? Would the government have the power to tell the mill owners how they should run their business, or was the mill owners gonna be able to maintain their authority on how they wanted things run?
I see.
Is that, I mean,
Well, I think we've got a free country, and people have got a right to do. They don't have to be in the business. I know some people who said they'd just rather not do that. They'd rather fight it out, I guess, if you want to do that. I know this, that I would not want to go out and just try to organize a mill and have them in the union. I don't mind having participation of ownership in myself, and I value the input from our employees. I consider that very, very about the most important part of our business.
You've evolved. I mean, you've really gone through a lot of changes, haven't you, all these years?
Well, I think so, yes. Some interesting experiences.
Do you think was the 1934 General Textile Strike something that the manufacturers talked about amongst themselves after the strike?
Well, I have to tell you, I have been so depressed myself over not being able to sell. I've tried to get, for several months now, I've been trying to get middlemen to give me ideas, you understand, about how we can get our industry on a profitable basis. Our industry happens to be we have spent more money in the textile industry of what our profits have been, their industry, in modernizing, than the textile industry, with the exception of the computer business. And I think that industry has done more. But the textile industry has more money invested in it. You understand? But you can employ more people per dollar invested. And that's what every country wants to employ people. And I think you can put up a textile mill and employ more people, you understand, than most any industry. That's what I think.